Hi, this video is in response to one of my viewers who wrote me a little message and asked me to view his movies. So I watched them, and he was defending Islam and certain things. Also, like historically, he brought things up. So I would just like to refute not refute, but discuss my opinions of some of those things. And I'm sorry if the video is hastily done or anything like that. I have to study for a computer midterm in a few minutes, and I just wanted to do this first. So it's kind of hastily put together. So I wrote out notes, so I may be looking at the screen. First of all, in your video, you stress the word Islam historically. Islam historically. Islam historically. You said that many, many times. And perhaps all of that is true, but truthfully, I'm not interested in historically what Islam has done at this current moment. I want to know, what is Islam doing right now? How are they acting? How are they thinking? And currently, I do not see tolerance stemming from the Middle East. The Pope said violence for the sake of religion should not exist, and ironically, all the protests that were shown on TV against the Pope looked pretty darn violent to me. All I know is I certainly would not have wanted to be in one of those crowds while they were protesting, and I certainly would not have wanted to be wearing a crucifix either. And I know you mentioned the two men who killed that nun, and you said because of these two idiots. Well, what about all the people in the streets protesting? They did not look peaceful. Peaceful ways of responding are writing and talking and seeming educated, and that just looked like a crazy mob. You also mentioned that Muslim Jews and Christians lived together peacefully during the Muslim occupation of Spain. But isn't it true that during this time, although Christian and Jews were allowed to practice their religion, it was under severely restricted conditions that reminded them they were second-class citizens? So maybe it was fine for the Muslims, but not so for the Christians and the Jews. I am not educated in Arabic, so I'm going to butcher some of these names, I'm sure. But Umar ibn al-Khattab, a caliph from 634 to 644, made Christians promise, "We made a condition on ourselves that we will neither erect in our areas a monastery, church, or sanctuary for a monk, nor restore any place of worship that needs restoration, nor use any of them for the purpose of enmity against Muslims." That is not equality to me. The Christians then could not practice in the way that they are supposed to practice their religion in a church. Or perhaps if they were a monk, in a monastery, or anything like that. So that doesn't seem very tolerant to me. And I also came across in my readings that Jews and Christians were forbidden on pain of death to try to convert Muslims. And if, as you say, Muslims encouraged discussion, why wouldn't these Christian and Jews be able to go out and, I want to say preach, but not necessarily do that, but talk about their religion and perhaps try to attract converts? Why would that be forbidden by death? And also, the jizya, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it, the tax for non-Muslims was apparently a terrible burden. It was terrible. It was not a nice burden. Christians, for instance, had to sell their children at one point. I read somewhere that they were so poor they had to sell their children because they could not afford the tax. And in my reading, some medieval guy said that is why much of North Africa and the Middle East quickly became Muslim, because they could not pay the taxes. And to come back to the original idea that, not the idea, and not the original one, certainly, but the instance that Jews and Christians were also forbidden on pain of death to try to convert Muslims. Now, you mentioned historically, and I told you that I want to talk about contemporarily. Well, let me see where I have it, in 2003, October 2003, Egyptian officials arrested 22 Christians, many of them former Muslims, who had secretly converted to Christianity. They were questioned and tortured. Authorities suspected that several of them were trying to bring Muslims to Christianity. And then we also have, in December of 2003, in a Pakistani village, a mob of Muslims attacked a prayer service, a Christian prayer service, shouting, "You infidels, stop praying and accept Islam." According to the newspaper, the mob entered the church and started beating the worshippers. The Muslim attackers desecrated the Holy Bible and broke everything in the church. However, the police refused to lodge any report, and at the local hospital, Muslim doctors ignored the injured Christians at the direction of an influential local Muslim. And in May of 2004, another Christian charged with blasphemy was beaten to death with a hammer by a Muslim policeman as he lay in a hospital bed suffering from tuberculosis. So I am sorry, but I am not seeing a lot of tolerance coming out of that area. If anything, what I just read is gross intolerance. And it doesn't happen in the West, no matter what you want to say. I certainly have not ever beaten anyone to death because they were not Christian or not Catholic or not Jewish. That has not happened. And I do not know anyone who has done that, nor do I know I haven't even heard a story about it. And perhaps, like you will say, it's not everyone in Islam doing it. Of course not. We know that. And that is why we say Islamo-fascists. Because it is not the normal, average, regular Muslim. It is extremists. And we don't welcome extremists in any society, no matter what religion.